Hello everyone. So I wanted to make a PowerPoint about the ranked game mode of Apex Legends and how I believe and a lot of other people believe that it needs to align with the type of scoring system that competitive Apex Legends has. Um it's going to be heavily critical of the current system. I think a lot of players in higher elo are pretty dissatisfied with how the current system plays out, and so for that reason, the discussion of this PowerPoint is only going to be towards high elo only, which you can define high elo as whatever you want, but I'm just going to define it as higher diamond to predator. So a small intro about who I am. My name is Kiki. I've been playing Apex Legends since season 14. I played Challenger Circuit for a very short period of time, and I just feel like competitive is by far the peak of Apex. So I want to go over some points about what I think is the peak of Apex so that we have a better understanding, so that we can understand the reasons for why I want these changes in the rank system. So let's ask the question first. What makes Apex so good? Why do players love Apex? It's obviously the core shooting mechanics, the heavy team reliance, movement, fluidity of the movement. But what is the player base missing out on? And I feel like this is just something that the player base just does not get to experience unless they've played competitive. And for that reason, I'm saying that there's extra dimensions of the game that the player base just completely gets to miss out on. And they only get to see these core shooting mechanics. They're missing out on some of the team reliant type of stuff. But when I think about like what makes Apex so good for me personally, I said I played like a very short period of Challenger Circuit. I watch a lot of Pro League. I watch a lot of comp in general, and I think that we are just completely missing out on those extra dimensions that competitive Apex has to offer. When I think about like what makes Apex for me so good, I'm thinking about it from a competitive mindset, from the having high teams alive in early, mid, late game, having things where just situations that you just don't get to experience in ranked right now that you would in competitive. And it is mostly about just having a lot of teams alive throughout the game. Having a lot of teams alive throughout the game just brings so many different adversity situations, or it's not the proper word for it, but just situations that are very difficult in the game. It brings out macro, it brings out a lot of strategy, it brings out a lot of different diverse comps, and that is the thing that I feel like Apex is missing. Um, I want to be able to have that in ranked. I want to be able to see that there's a lot of teams alive throughout the game, that we are struggling with macro, that we are struggling to get into the next zone, that we are actually taking fights that have to be taken rather than just what we see right now, which is just fighting just a fight, no real thoughts about what's going on in the game. And so that's why I put this extra dimensions of the game that players do not get to experience if they've never gotten to play competitive. There's so many things that happen and competitive that just add such layers and depth to the game that make it really enjoyable and really replayable. Okay. So even if I didn't explain that well, that's kind of what I'm trying to go through with the point system. It's the point system that I think Apex ranked needs to have is one that basically puts this type of competitive high teams alive throughout the entire game, high team end games, lots of players just living into the end of the game. Okay. So first of all, for the point system, I think we've gone through many seasons where we've tried to do point system where we have higher placement points, or point system where we have higher kill points. And I'm not really sure why we haven't been able to actually find a correct point system for this long. But one of the biggest things that I think the point system is missing is punishment for dying early. So this is just a example of what I think this needs to look like. And so you can see like from 20th to 10th, you have like a downscaling RP loss. So in your 20th place, you would experience significantly higher RP loss, and as you go down all the way to 10th, you would eventually reach your base entry cost. And this would be just a point of preventing teams from just fighting off spawn, taking random fights that don't need to occur. And the idea of this implementation is that punishment is so heavy for dying early in the game that teams want to live. They want to try and make it to the next zone. They want to try and make it to the end game. And this is what the game kind of misses out on, is that if you die early, you just lose your base entry cost. And for a lot of players, that's not really, they don't really care, you know, especially higher elo players. They just, not even a thought occurs into their brain about dying 20th. They just queue for the next game. They take the minus 65 or whatever their entry cost is, and it doesn't really feel that it was punishing, you know? When you lose early in the game, you should feel like you lost early. You should feel that punishment. You know, in competitive, if a team dies 20th, if they even die 10th place, they feel terrible. You know, even with a small amount of KP or much KP at all, you know, you feel terrible for dying early. And I think that's what the rank system just completely misses out on. And I would just like to see some type of implementation where we are wanting teams to make it to the end game and we are punishing them if they die early. So that was more just like the placement for dying early. But it's kind of a two-part thing, and I think the game implements some form of this. I could be wrong, but the kill point implementation that I think would need to happen is that early game, since we already have we already have like a really punishing, if you die early, you just get punished very heavily, and that's the way I think it should be. But it's a two-part thing with kill points. You would need to implement kill points in a way that if you were to kill the 20th place team, you wouldn't get awarded the full kill point until later in the game. So you would only get awarded a small percentage. And this would also contribute to teams not just inting each other off the start of the game. And it would help contribute to teams wanting to live longer, you know? If I know I'm only going to get a very minor percentage of kill points early game, I'm not just going to randomly go and fight a team for no reason at all. I'm going to try to survive first until there's better opportunity and placement to take fights and stuff like that. You know, it's not saying that the kill points are going to be worthless, you know? You just have to decide at what point do you give the full value of the kill point. And we can't just give it to them right off the start. We can't give it to them when it's like 15th place, you know. We have to try to give them those full kill points as it reaches the later half of the game, because this is just more incentive for them to want to survive, you know. And I think it's just a combination of having a higher punishment for dying early and then having a less reward for getting kills very early. And these are just the incentives that I think we need to implement so that teams and players, they want to survive longer. More teams creates more chaos, creates higher strategy. It just creates more adversity, and it makes the game more enjoyable. So that's enough about the points talk. Now I want to get into discussing what I personally believe will make the ladder more competitive and entertaining. I think there's some really odd things that Apex has just made a norm that doesn't really help its case when we're talking about like the very top end of the ladder. And one of the biggest issues that I think with the top end of the ladder is that we just allow a few players to just run away with RP for the entire season. And we basically incentivize that a player starts the season and plays 12 hours a day for the entire season so that they can be the highest rank. From an entertainment point of view, this is just like not entertaining at all. You know, you kind of have an idea of who's gonna win at the end of the season, who's gonna be the number 1, number 2 players, because they just completely take off, you know. And why I say it's not entertaining is for two reasons. It doesn't make the ladder very close, you know. Only maybe the bottom half of the ladder is close, but nobody really has like a big care for that. It's usually, if we're talking about entertainment point of view, we're talking about the very top end of the ladder, you know, which is you could probably imagine it's like top 10. Um, so what do I think would make the ladder more entertaining is just implementing what other games do, and that's just a soft cap at the very high end of the ladder. You don't have to basically say, let me explain what I mean by that. A soft cap at the end of the ladder, we're basically just saying like, take a number, say it's 100k RP, and basically make it at that point where the gains are so punishing for the player and pred that it makes it hard for them to justify queuing more games. This is just so that you can basically reach a peak of the ladder and multiple players can reach that peak. You know, a lot of players can reach that peak if possible, you know, but it's more of just so that you don't have a player that just sprints away with the pred race and is just queuing 12 to 16 hour days, because it's just really not entertaining for the game. From a viewer point of view, from a player point of view, there's just no incentive really to grind, to play, because if you actually really care about getting number one, it needs to be attainable. And that's what I'm just saying right here on the very bottom. The peak of the ladder just needs to be reachable by other top ranked players for the entire season. We shouldn't incentivize people. I just want to say it again. We shouldn't incentivize players to just play from day one of the season, 12 to 16 hour days. Just because one is it's unhealthy, but two, it's just not entertaining. You know, you want to have an entertaining ladder, and you have to basically soft cap the high end. You basically have to pick a number, and you need to make the RP gains so poor at that number that it basically stops them from being able to climb anymore. And just to continue, let me read this really quick. Yeah, so this is just continuing on. If you soft cap the top of the ladder, you basically prevent what I said of the day one queuing and then queuing every day through the entire season to be the number one player, and you actually incentivize the players to have the highest win rate, and those will be the ones that are at the top of the ladder. Okay, even though right now we see the players that are winning the most, they are at the top of the ladder, it is just run away with the ladder, play 12 to 16 hour days, and there's just no soft cap on it. Okay, so when I say we want the top of the ladder to see such poor gains in their RP that they basically have to stop queuing, I'm basically saying that my idea of the point system is that we don't want pred players to have scaling entry costs, because all scaling entry costs do is it incentivizes the pred players to just run down lobbies, try to get as many kills as they can so that they can experience proper gains. Instead, the way that I think we should implement it is that instead of a scaling entry cost, you would scale the penalty for dying early. So say, for example, 20th place had a minus 95 for dying in Diamond, okay? You would basically want the pred player to, instead of have that minus 95, scale it to like, scale that part, you know, scale that to like minus 135, minus 145, minus 150, you know, make that part punishing, because that actually defines the pred player as winning the most. You know, if they queue and they mess up one single time, it's gonna just make it such a severe penalty, and that's what's gonna get them to basically decide, hey, do I want to keep queuing or not? Because my gains are just terrible, you know, and that's gonna reach us at a peak that other players can obtain. So this is just really discussing how to make the top of the ladder entertaining. And I think a combination of making ranked more entertaining by having it more reflect competitive, because competitive does bring viewership, but ranked does not bring viewership right now. It just doesn't, with the way it is. Okay. And so I did put a little question at the end. Why would we want our number one player to stop queuing? You know, it is what it is. In other games where they implement these soft caps on the ranks, the number one player does eventually stop queuing, and they might hop on an alt account, and I don't think that's a major issue. You know, if we're talking about how to handle alt accounts. Typically, if they hop on an alt account, they're gonna be smurfing for a very short period of time, and they're gonna be back at playing in their matches with the proper their proper rank. So I don't think that's a big issue. But you will experience players, if you implement a soft cap on ranked, you will experience players camping their rank, and this happens in every game, you know. And so the way other games have handled it, people are pretty aware of it, is rank decay. Rank decay is a good thing to have in a game if you have players camping their ranks, and I think that's completely okay. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about for making the top half of ranked entertaining and more competitive is regarding new seasons. We used to do this, and I'm not really sure why we moved away from it, but we used to not use MMR to decide where a player starts in their rank. We used to just, excuse me, we used to just basically start all the pred players in the same rank, and they would climb from there. And I'm not really, like I said, I'm not really sure why we moved away from this, because a lot of the pred players, they find the first part of the climb in the new season extremely important, and it's actually when viewership is pretty high because of new season. It's when they actually, some of the most competitive games happen. And like I said, it's happened. I can't count how many seasons it's been in a row, but we've been using MMR, and this MMR is a completely different story about why I don't even think it's actually that great and that accurate. But in general, if your player base is finding something extremely important to them, which is the player who hits number 1 first on a new season, you should ideally like set them up to have a pred race, you know? I know it's not something that happens in a lot of games where who hits number 1 first is very important, but in this game it is very important. So I think we should move back away from MMR placements at the start of the new season. That's enough. Actually, it's going to continue a bit, but that's enough about the point system, and about this is just a continuation about what I think ranked needs. So I believe many games have implemented this. You know, we don't have to be like every single game, but there are mechanics that just work, you know, and character bans are one of them. So currently in ranked, we just see the same 3 to 5 characters played, and it's just spammed every single game. You have, I'm not sure the exact number of months that seasons last, but seasons are pretty long. And if you basically just run into this meta for the entire season, it does become extremely stale. And I think character bans just really need to be implemented, because it doesn't seem like it would be the most expensive task to implement. You know, you could just force players to click a character that they want to ban in the menu, and then just carry that data over into the game. Server picks the ban, done. You know, I think it's pretty lightweight to implement. That could be very newbie to say, but in general, the reason for character bans is that it just gives diversity to games. It allows you to also, if you just have characters that you really do not enjoy playing against, it allows you to take them out of the games, you know. And I put Axel here for an example because she is extremely overtuned right now. But in general, if players do not want to play against something, giving them the option to ban it is a positive for the player base, you know. And it might be frustrating for the developers if they were to like release a new character like Axel and then just see that character getting banned. But it is a reflection of what the player base wants to face, you know. And if they think something is too strong or unfun, they don't want to play against it, you know. And they don't want to have to play against it every single game of their like season. And especially how I said seasons last for a while, the meta lasts for a while. We just need options for diverse games, you know. And at minimal, like I said, there is like so many creative ways that you could implement bans, but at minimal, just like a single character ban, you know. I know there is a lot of thought that would have to go into it. You probably wouldn't want to see the same characters banned every single game. You would have to implement some certain rules for that happening. You might want multiple bans, but just at minimal, I think it should be implemented in its most basic form. So that's kind of enough about ranked, and pretty much the last thing that I kind of want to talk about, which I think is pretty important, is Apex has gotten a little bit better with this, but back then we just used to see pretty like null communication. Like there was nothing really for community communications other than just like patch updates, and maybe every once in a while you see a dev tweet out. But let me talk about who this person is right here, because if you don't know who he is. So I come from a background, like I've been playing League of Legends for a little bit, but Apex is still the main game that I play. But League of Legends has implemented basically like a community relations type of person, and his name is Drew Levin. And what does Drew Levin do? He kind of just he works with the team for, I think, like player behavior type of stuff. There's some other things he works on with the systems, but from what the player gets to see the most of is he's on social media all the time, responding to player questions, responding to people sending in information regarding like another player violating like the guidelines of the game, whether it's like griefing, like verbally abusing players, stuff like that. He's like on there on Twitter. He's able to like help issue bans to players. And I think like among the other things, all the things that he does, it's just like it's very nice to have somebody that can communicate with the community at like all periods of the, like most periods of the day. And I think Apex really needs this. You know, I know Apex implemented some communications account where we get to see like potential updates and new updates and stuff like that. I think that's really good, you know, but we do also need somebody that can kind of serve as like a middleman between the player base to the developers, as well as somebody that can like be there to answer questions, be there to like potentially issue bans when you run into things that happen, you know. I know Hideouts did that for like a very short period of time, but we can't expect developers to spend their time on social media. You know, you kind of have to have somebody that's pretty dedicated to it, that their job is to do it. And I think Apex really needs this, because you might have like, you just have like a frustrating experience because you don't have any really form of to communicate with the developers. And say like for console players, they go on Twitter all the time and they'll post about a ranked match where they run into like 6 players or 9 players teaming with each other, and there will just like not really ever be a response on it, you know. So maybe every once in a while like you'll see Hideouts respond to it and he'll like issue the bans or like he'll communicate with them. But just like falling when you post things like that and it just kind of falls on like dead ears, like you don't get to see anything happen with it, it's not a very good feeling for the community. And so if Apex ever implemented this, I think it would just be a huge positive for the game. And like I said, I put a note here. It's completely understandable why developers do not have a direct form of communication to the public. We can definitely understand. Like social media is definitely just a garbage place to be sometimes, especially as like a developer, like that are probably having a lot of work, and then they have to go on there and see all the hate they're getting. You know, it's completely understandable. But like I said, it doesn't mean it shouldn't exist. You know, and if Apex were to ever implement something like this, to have the Drew Levin of Apex Legends, I would ask, like, please don't put them under like a corporate filter. You know, like we need somebody that's gonna like actually respond and have like the personality to respond, and is not just gonna give like very basic answers. I know that's like kind of hard to implement because it's company based. You know, some companies just like will not care for any of that. They will just always follow like PR scripts and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I think it's like a big part of community relations, and I think League of Legends has done a really good job with it. I think Valorant has some small forms of it too, but most games kind of just skip over this, and I think it's actually important to have. So that's all. Like I said, I appreciate anyone who listened to this. I'm a highly passionate person about the game direction of Apex. I have a lot of thoughts about how I think the game should be directed, and one of my biggest pain points is just that we just have not gotten to see a good ranked system for the entirety of that I've played the game. I know, like, I can't speak about seasons before that, but I just think when people go online and they say, man, I wish Apex could just live up to its potential, there's so many things, but ranked is just one of the biggest pain points. And I really think if we were to implement these changes, especially in higher elo, I don't want to talk. I didn't want to talk about anything other than high elo because I don't know what the casual player base wants. I think we would see a great response from the player base if we just implemented these types of things, or even if we didn't implement these types of things, if we just tried to make changes that reflected competitive Apex better and reflected like the best parts of Apex, I think we would see a really good response. Thank you.